There is a story Hill told more often than any other story in his body of work, and he told it because it carried the principle in its cleanest form. A man named R.U. Darby went west during the gold rush. He staked a claim. He dug. After weeks of work, he hit ore, real gold. He covered the find, went home, raised the money for machinery, came back and started extracting. The first carload of ore came up rich. The second carload paid for the machinery. The third carload was scheduled to bring the family's fortune. Then the vein stopped. Darby drilled. The drills came up empty. He moved the equipment. Empty. He moved it again. Empty. The vein had vanished. After weeks of trying to find it again, Darby gave up. He sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and went home to feed it. The junk man brought in a mining engineer. The engineer studied the lay of the land for an afternoon, ran his calculations and pointed at a spot in the rock. 3 feet from where Darby had stopped drilling, the junk man drilled. 3 feet of rock. And on the other side of those 3 feet, the vein continued. Millions of dollars in gold sat behind 3 feet of stone Darby never drilled through. Hill told that story for 40 years because he saw the same shape in 500 other lives. The shape of someone walking away 3 feet from gold, stopping just before the vein opened up again, calling it failure when it was something else entirely. That is what we are walking through today. The thing Hill actually discovered when he spent 20 years across the table from over 500 of the most successful people in the country on Andrew Carnegie's commission. The discovery that changes the whole vocabulary around the word failure. The discovery that, once you see it, makes you look back at every closed door in your life and ask whether the door was actually closed or whether you stopped pushing 1 inch before it would have given. Stay with me. There is a story the discovery rests on, and I want to put it in front of you first. In 1908, Andrew Carnegie summoned a young journalist named Napoleon Hill to interview him for a magazine article. Hill arrived expecting an afternoon of questions. Carnegie sat with him for 3 days. At the end of the 3rd day, Carnegie asked Hill if he would accept a commission. The commission was to spend the next 20 years interviewing the most accomplished people in America and to organize their methods into a philosophy of achievement that anyone could apply. There was no salary. Carnegie offered letters of introduction to the people Hill would need to interview: steel magnates, inventors, bankers, authors, the men who had built the country's wealth in 1 generation. Hill would have access to all of them through Carnegie's name, and nothing else. Carnegie pulled out a stopwatch. He told Hill that if Hill's answer took longer than 60 seconds, the offer would be withdrawn. Hill said yes in 29 seconds. 20 years later, Hill emerged with the body of work the lineage has been teaching from ever since. Inside that body of work was a discovery he kept circling back to in every chapter, every lecture, every recording. A discovery so different from the way most people use the word failure that he had to invent new language to describe it. Hill discovered that failure, the way most people understand the word, does not exist. There is a different thing that goes by the same name, and the misunderstanding between the two has cost more lives than any other piece of confusion in the body of work. That is the principle on the table. And the way the lineage taught it was through stories. So that is how we are walking through it today. Story by story, floor by floor, of understanding, until the word failure no longer means what you thought it meant when you walked into this script. Drop a like if this is hitting you right now. It helps get this in front of the right people who need to see how the machine actually works. The first piece of the discovery is the difference between temporary defeat and failure. Hill drew this distinction in Chapter 6 of Think and Grow Rich, and came back to it in nearly every other chapter. Temporary defeat is what most people are calling failure when they use the word. The vein has stopped. The plan has not produced the expected result. The deal fell through. The launch flopped. The relationship ended. The business closed. Each of those is a moment in time, a snapshot, a specific event that happened on a specific day. Failure in Hill's vocabulary is something different. Failure is the moment a person accepts a temporary defeat as a permanent verdict. Failure is the inner mind's filing of an event as the final story, rather than as a piece of data. The event itself is neutral. The filing is what matters. Two people can experience the same temporary defeat. One files it as a piece of feedback and keeps drilling. The other files it as evidence of personal inadequacy and walks away. Same event. Different file, different lives downstream. Picture a building with many doors. Each door represents a path forward. The seeker is walking down the hallway, trying doors. Some open, most are locked. Behind one of the locked doors is the thing the seeker came for. The seeker tries 40 doors. None open. The seeker stops at door 41 and assumes the building is empty. The mining engineer would have looked at the same building and said, "You have tried 40 doors. The building has 200. The math says you have tried 20% of the doors. Keep trying." Hill saw this pattern in every one of the 500 interviews. The successful ones had been told no more times than the unsuccessful ones. They had been told no in different ways. They had been told no by different people. The volume of no in their lives was not lower. It was usually higher. The difference was in the filing. The successful ones filed each no as feedback on the door, not as a verdict on the seeker. They walked down the hallway and tried the next door. That is the first story you have to take with you out of this script. Failure and temporary defeat live in different rooms in the inner mind. Most lives are organized around a confusion between the two. What does that look like in observable behavior? Someone files a setback as failure. They feel the weight of it for months. They start avoiding the area where the setback happened. They tell the story of the setback to friends in a way that makes the setback the headline of the chapter. The deeper mind, hearing the story over and over, treats the story as instruction. It builds the rest of the chapter to match. Compare that to someone who files the same setback as temporary defeat. They feel the weight of it for a few days. They look at the data. They adjust the plan. They go back into the area, and the next attempt benefits from the lessons of the first. The deeper mind, hearing this version of the story, treats the story as research. It keeps the door open. Same event. 2 filings, 2 lives. You see why Hill was so careful about this? The vocabulary you use to describe a setback is the instruction your deeper mind receives about how to handle the next one. Calling it failure programs the inner mind to expect more of the same. Calling it temporary defeat programs the inner mind to keep drilling. Okay? So that is the first story. The second story is the one that explains why people stop 3 feet from gold, even when they know the principle. Hill told it through Edwin Barnes, and the story is the opening chapter of Think and Grow Rich. Edwin Barnes was a young man with no money, no education, and no introduction. He had one idea. He wanted to be a business associate of Thomas Edison, not an employee, an associate, a peer. He arrived at Edison's office having ridden a freight train into West Orange, New Jersey. Looking, by Hill's description, like an ordinary tramp, he walked into the office and announced he had come to be Edison's associate. Edison looked at him for a long moment. Edison later said the thing that struck him about Barnes that day was not what Barnes said. It was the look on Barnes's face, the look of a man who had decided something and was prepared to wait however long it took for the decision to come true. Edison hired Barnes as a clerk, the lowest position in the company. Barnes took it. For 5 years, Barnes worked as a clerk. From the outside, he looked like a clerk who was getting nowhere. From the inside, Barnes was holding the picture. The picture was associate. The clerk position was the door he had been given. He worked the door. He waited. Then, one day, Edison brought out a new invention, a dictating machine. The salesmen at the company looked at it and could not figure out how to sell it. Barnes asked for the chance. Edison let him try. Barnes sold the machine so successfully, he became the exclusive distributor for the entire country. He made a fortune. He became, by every measure that mattered, Edison's business associate. Hill told that story because of one detail. 5 years. Barnes worked as a clerk for 5 years before the door opened. During those 5 years, the world looked at him and saw a clerk going nowhere. During those 5 years, Barnes himself had every reason to file his situation as failure, every reason to walk away, every reason to call the picture he had arrived with a youthful illusion and to find a more reasonable life. He held the picture for 5 years, and then the vein opened. The principle Hill drew from that story is the principle of definite purpose as anchor, the thing that lets a person stay at the drilling site through the dry weeks, through the empty carloads, through the years of being called a clerk by the world. The anchor is a clear, definite, repeated, emotionalized statement of what the person is after. Without the anchor, the storms of temporary defeat blow the boat off course. With the anchor, the boat holds position. Picture a seawall. The waves come at the wall day after day. Each wave hits with weight. The wall does not move. The waves are not weaker because the wall is there. The wall is just heavier than the waves. The accumulated mass of the wall is what allows it to remain in the same position while the surf changes around it. A definite chief aim is the seawall. The waves are the temporary defeats. Each defeat hits with full force. Some of them hit with enormous force. The wall holds because the wall was built before the storm came. The wall was built through writing the goal, reading the goal aloud, holding the picture, returning to the same definite statement morning and night until the deeper mind built the wall stone by stone. What does that look like in observable behavior? Someone with a definite chief aim takes a setback and processes it inside a frame. The frame is the goal. The setback is data inside the frame. They lose the deal. They feel the loss. They check the loss against the goal. The goal is still in place. They adjust the plan and keep drilling. From the outside, they look unfazed. On the inside, the wall held because the wall was built. Someone without a definite chief aim takes the same setback and has nothing to process it against. The setback becomes the whole picture. The setback is the verdict. They walk away. If something in this just clicked for you, drop a comment and tell us what shifted. We read every single one. The third piece of the discovery is the principle Hill came back to in Chapter 3 on faith and Chapter 8 on decision. The mechanics of quitting, what actually happens in the deeper mind when a person quits. This is where the discovery gets specific. Hill argued across thousands of pages of writing that quitting is not a single act. It is a programming event. When a person quits in response to temporary defeat, the deeper mind files the sequence as a successful response. The deeper mind reads the sequence this way. Pressure arrived. Quitting relieved the pressure. Therefore, quitting is the appropriate response to pressure. File that as program. Run it next time pressure arrives. The next time pressure arrives, the deeper mind reaches for the program it filed. Quitting. The threshold for quitting drops. The next quit comes faster. The pattern locks in. By the third or fourth iteration, the person has installed a paradigm that responds to any significant resistance with retreat. The paradigm operates without conscious permission. From the outside, the person looks like someone who lacks persistence. On the inside, the deeper mind is running the program it was taught. Hill saw this pattern repeat in over 500 interviews. The unsuccessful ones had taught their deeper minds to quit early, through repeated quitting, until quitting was the default response. The successful ones had done the opposite. They had taught their deeper minds to keep drilling, through repeated drilling until drilling was the default response. The same mechanics, the same deeper mind. Different inputs, different defaults. Picture 2 roads through a field. One has been walked 20 times. The grass is starting to bend, the path is faint. The other road has been walked 2,000 times. The path is a deep groove. A traveler arriving at the field, unfamiliar with the terrain, will take the deeper groove. The deeper groove is what the deeper mind reaches for. Each time a person responds to pressure with persistence, the persistence groove deepens Each time a person responds to pressure with quitting, the quitting groove deepens. The deeper groove takes the wheel. The pattern is mechanics, working as mechanics work. That is why Hill said, with the calm certainty of someone who had observed the principle 500 times, that persistence is to character what carbon is to steel. Steel without carbon is iron. Iron is soft. Iron bends. Steel resists. The thing that turns iron into steel is the addition of carbon. The thing that turns a person into someone who can stay at the drilling site is the repeated practice of persistence under pressure. What does that look like in observable behavior? Someone who has been practicing persistence for a year handles a setback differently than someone who has been practicing quitting for a year. The first one feels the setback, takes a day, and gets back to the work. The second one feels the same setback, takes a day, and finds 3 reasons the work was not a fit anyway. Both reactions feel honest from the inside. Both are programs running in the deeper mind. Different programs. Different futures. You see why the lineage put this principle next to definite chief aim? The chief aim is the SEAWALL. Persistence is the carbon in the steel of the wall. Without the chief aim, persistence has nothing to be persistent toward. Without the persistence, the chief aim has no defense against the waves. Subscribe if you want more of this. We teach from Carnegie, Hill, Nightingale, Proctor, and the full lineage, and we go this deep every single time. The fourth piece of the discovery is the one that resolves everything underneath it. Hill called it the seed of equivalent benefit. He stated it in chapter 12 and circled back to it in nearly every chapter after. Every adversity, every temporary defeat, every painful setback carries within it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. This is the part where the principle stops being a coping strategy and becomes mechanics. Hill was not telling people to look on the bright side. He was describing what he had observed in over 500 lives. Each significant achievement traced back in the histories of the people who had achieved it to a temporary defeat that had carried inside it the conditions for the achievement. The defeat was the door. The benefit was on the other side. Without the defeat, the door would not have opened. Marshall Field stood in the smoking ashes of his store after the Great Chicago Fire. Other merchants stood in the same ashes that day. Most of them were planning what to tell their creditors. Field looked at the ashes and announced that he would build on that very spot the world's greatest store. He did. The store became one of the most successful retail operations in American history. The fire was the door. The store was on the other side. Without the fire, the store would not have existed in the form it took. Henry Ford insisted on building a V8 engine cast as a single block of metal. His engineers told him it could not be done. Ford told them to do it anyway. They tried for a year. They came back and reported that it was, in fact, impossible. Ford told them to keep trying. They tried for another 6 months. Eventually, one of them figured it out. The V8 engine became the foundation of Ford's dominance for 2 decades. Each round of impossibility was a temporary defeat that carried inside it the conditions for the breakthrough that came next. What was Hill describing mechanically? The deeper mind, properly directed, treats every setback as research. The research compounds. The compounding produces eventually an arrangement of information and conditions that the person could not have arranged through forward motion alone. The setbacks were the path. The setbacks were the research department. The benefit was the publication. Picture an oak tree growing in rocky soil. The tree's roots, encountering rock, are forced to grow around the rock. The roots that grow around rock are stronger than the roots that grow through soft loam. The tree that survives the rocky soil is more deeply anchored than the tree that grew up easy. The rock was the door. The depth of the root system was on the other side. What does that look like in observable behavior? Someone takes a temporary defeat that, on the surface, looks devastating. They lose the contract. The relationship ends. The launch flops. They feel the weight. They sit with it, and then, with their definite chief aim still in place, they ask the question Hill recommended in chapter 14. What is the seed of equivalent benefit in this? What does this defeat carry inside it that the success could not have carried? They look. They listen. They wait. Sometimes the answer arrives in days, sometimes in years. The answer arrives because the question was asked. The deeper mind, hearing the question, sets the search engine running. The seed is found. Hill saw this in 500 Lives. He stated it as law because he had observed it as law. Every adversity carries the seed. The only variable is whether the person has been trained to look for the seed or trained to call the adversity the end of the chapter. That right there, that is the whole game. So now the 4 pieces of the discovery sit on the table. Temporary defeat is not failure. Quitting is the deeper mind being programmed to quit faster next time. A definite chief aim is the seawall against the waves. Every adversity carries a seed of equivalent benefit. 4 pieces. 1 discovery. The discovery that the word failure, as most people use it, names a piece of confusion the lineage has been clearing up for almost 90 years. Now the closing picture. Hill walked into Edison's lab on a freight train and walked out 20 years later with the body of work the lineage has been teaching from ever since. He spent those 20 years asking the people who had built lasting things what they had done. The people he interviewed answered with their stories. The stories all had the same shape. There was a moment of temporary defeat. There was a decision about how to file the moment. There was a definite chief aim that survived the decision. There was a persistence that turned iron into steel. There was a seed, found later, that turned out to have been planted by the very setback that had felt like the end. Picture R.U. Darby walking away from the mine, 3 feet from gold, the vein on the other side of 3 feet of rock. He walked away because he had filed the empty drillings as failure. The junk man brought in an engineer. The engineer looked at the lay of the land. The engineer pointed at the spot. 3 feet of drilling, millions of dollars in ore. The same mine, the same vein, different filing. Hill told that story for 40 years because the story is everyone's story. Most lives are lived 3 feet from gold. The vein went quiet. The drilling came up empty. The decision was made to walk away. The decision felt reasonable. The decision was made on the basis of the surface evidence, with the definite chief aim either absent or already eroded by the storms. The discovery is not a feel-good piece of philosophy. The discovery is mechanics. Every temporary defeat is a piece of feedback the deeper mind will accept as data or as verdict, depending on the framing the conscious mind supplies. The conscious mind's framing is what the morning written goal is for, is what the definite chief aim is for, is what the practice of persistence is for. The framing is the seawall. The framing is the carbon in the steel. Picture the stretch of silence between the moment the vein went quiet and the moment the engineer arrived with the calculation. That stretch of silence is the 3 feet of rock. The people who keep drilling through it find out what is on the other side. The people who walk away never find out. The mine looks empty either way to the person who walks away. The mine looks empty until the moment it does not. Hill said in Chapter 13 that the brain has been called the bridge between man and infinite intelligence. He meant that the deeper mind, properly directed, has access to information and arrangements the surface mind cannot produce on its own. The bridge is open when the 4 pieces of the discovery are in place. Temporary defeat is filed correctly. The persistence groove is being deepened. The chief aim is held steady. The seed of equivalent benefit is being looked for. With those 4 conditions met, the bridge carries answers across. That is what Hill actually discovered. That failure, as most people use the word, is a misunderstanding. That what people are calling failure is a temporary moment that carries inside it the very conditions for the achievement they had been seeking. That the achievement is on the other side of the moment. That the only way through the moment is to file it correctly, hold the chief aim, deepen the persistence groove, and look for the seed. Hill saw 500 people walk through 3 feet of rock to the gold on the other side. He spent 20 years on Carnegie's commission documenting the pattern. He published it in 1937 and the pattern has been in the open ever since. The mine is still there. The vein is still there. The engineer's calculation is still there. The only thing that has changed in the 90 years since the body of work was published is the number of people who have read the discovery and put down the shovel 1 inch before the gold. The stretch of silence is the 3 feet of rock. The drilling continues until it stops. The people who keep drilling through the silence find out what is on the other side. The people who file the silence as the end of the story walk away from a mine that was never empty. Failure may be a misunderstanding. That is what Hill discovered. The misunderstanding has cost more fortunes, more relationships, more bodies of work, more second acts, more lives than any other piece of confusion in the body of his teaching. The discovery is on the page, has been on the page since 1937, is on the page right now in any used bookstore in any city on any continent on the planet. The shovel is in your hand. The mine is the rest of your life. The discovery is that the silence is the 3 feet of rock and the gold is on the other side. Hill watched 500 people drill through. He spent 20 years writing it down. The body of work is here. The mine is here. The only thing left is the drilling.